समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The evening before her visit to hell, the young American traveler's holiday in the Edenesque resort in the Dominican Republic had been idyllic. For a week, she had swum in the ocean, hiked near an estuary, and sunbathed after a drink or two on the beach. You can't ask for much more under the light of the stars. Later, she felt a slight irritation in one ear and pulled out a fly. Then, on the flight home, the pain and the bleeding began. Tiny larvae, though she didn't know it, had begun to burrow their way through her flesh like screws, tearing their way towards her brain with their sharp, hook-like mandibles. Earlier this week, the United States reported its first new case of a human screwworm infestation in years and years, picked up again by a patient on a holiday visit to El Salvador. Thousands of cases of animal infestation and dozens in humans have been reported from across Central America as warming weather has enabled the resurgence of a parasite considered all but eradicated from the region in the 1990s. For America's increasingly inward-looking foreign policy establishment, there's an important lesson. The life-threatening epidemic ought to provide a rapid education in why, while you can blow up boats carrying immigrants or shut down borders or threaten to invade other countries, you can't fix problems without international cooperation. Since the 1950s, the United States used specifically fitted aircraft to release millions and millions of sterilized male screwworms that mated with the wild population. The program simply didn't give fertile screwworm males the chance to reproduce. This air war against the screwworm wasn't driven by American altruism or even to avoid relatively rare human infestations. The eradication of the screwworm, official estimates suggest, saves the United States cattle industry, its livestock industry, over $1 billion a year. The screwworm, however, has now breached the biological wall that was established at the Darien Gap in the Panama Canal over a period of decades. The pest is now relentlessly marching northwards towards America, helped by President Trump's flailing regional foreign policy. For generations, nations in conflict have known that there is no option except to cooperate in the face of ecological threats. Even though the two countries were just emerging from the border conflict, India and Pakistan worked together against locust swarms which devastated crops in 2020. Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Jordan ran joint programs to combat what's called the Mediterranean fruit fly. The 10 countries which fished for North Sea herring agreed on a moratorium when schools of this valuable catch became dangerously depleted in 1977, while the United States and Soviet Union cooperated against smallpox. They succeeded in eradicating the disease across the world. Lessons learned in the long war against the screwworm repeatedly demonstrated the benefits of international cooperation. The technology to rear and sterilize large numbers of screwworm were available early in the 1950s. The first successful eradication project took place, though, not in the United States but in Curaçao in the Dutch Antilles. Why? Because it had a problem and because its unique geographical location permitted scientists to very rigorously monitor whether the airdrops of sterile males were working or not. The success persuaded the United States to begin eradication efforts at home from 1957. The effort was gigantic. The fly breeding plant at Mission, Texas needed more than 100,000 kilos of meat and over 35,000 liters of whole blood to produce the 200 million sterile males which were needed at the time. This was for just a 1-week drop. In the earliest days of the sterile screwworm program, the flies stank so badly that airlines refused to carry them. One contemporary observer, the journalist Sarah Zhang, has reported. Workers eventually learned to get around the problem by spraying the boxes with cologne. Even this, however, wasn't enough. In 1963, scientists discovered that screwworm flies could fly distances of over 250 kilometers, much longer than previously thought. This meant that the United States Southwest could no longer depend on the sterile zone to be free of screwworm unless Mexico was also protected. In 1965, following a particularly severe outbreak, Mexican and United States governments were pressured by livestock producers to sign a declaration asking for a joint program for the eradication of the screwworm. The governments didn't listen at first, but a massive outbreak in 1972 led the United States to propose the setting up of a joint screwworm eradication program. This led to a biological wall being established at the isthmus of Tehuantepec at the 93rd meridian, the narrowest point in Mexico. In 1974, a sterile fly rearing facility was set up at Tuxtla Gutiérrez, and flight maps of the sterile fly releases show just how densely and methodically airdrops took place to make sure the entire region was blanketed in sterile male flies to eradicate this pest. Less than a decade later, the screwworm had been eliminated from much of Mexico, and scientists began to think of an even better way to deal with the problem. They now considered pushing the sterile wall further south to a narrower region easier to defend, the Darien Gap in Panama. This meant signing new cooperation agreements with Panama, the Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and of course Panama itself. A new fly rearing plant also had to be established in Panama. The war against the screwworm was, in some senses, a victim of its own success. The next step in the program ought to have been pushing forward, expanding it further, south to eliminate the threat from the rest of South America. America's livestock industry, though, didn't think it really needed to push further south from the Darien because the wall seemed to work. There was diminishing interest in the issue, and funding for the program also predictably began to dry up. Remember, funding for Panama came overwhelmingly from the United States Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. So when the Americans lost interest, everybody's work on this field just began to disappear. From 2023, though, the screwworm hit back. It resumed its northwards march. Explanations for why this happened vary widely in the scientific community. Large-scale smuggling of cattle grown in Central America's jungles and then led into the commercially grown flock is considered one possible movement. The massive migration of travelers through the Darien Gap hoping to cross the jungles into America and the collapse of the inspection system during the COVID pandemic are all attributed as possible reasons. Even as the worm marches forward, the infrastructure to build it has decayed. The fly factory in Panama has increased production from its usual 20 million odd flies a week to its maximum capacity of 100 million flies. The eradication program, though, in the 1980s, when it was at its peak, used 150 million flies a week, and that was just over the isthmus of Tehuantepec. The campaign in Mexico needed 550 million flies weekly. Big gap again. This much is clear, though. Trump's adversarial relationship with all his near neighbors, witness spats with Venezuela, with Panama, with Mexico, hasn't helped. In April 2025, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins wrote to her counterpart in Mexico with concerns that Mexico was impeding eradication efforts. Local authorities, she alleged, were obstructing the arrival of aircraft hired to release these sterile flies and also imposing duties on technical equipment. Likely, Mexico's actions were linked to bitter disputes that have been waging over Trump's bruising tariffs on imports and his threats to use military force across the border in his war against drug mafia. Mexico has still not stopped the cartels who are trying to turn all of North America into a narco-trafficking playground, Trump said in July. Obviously, I cannot let that happen. For her part, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has claimed with facts and figures that the United States is weaponizing the screwworm threat, pointing out that there had been just one single case in Veracruz which had led to the United States embargoing all imports of livestock across the border. To make things worse, Trump's funding cuts have diminished the ability of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration to monitor animal disease control. The funding cuts specifically targeted programs that address avian influenza and, you guessed it, the screwworm. Emergency funding is now being organized, but it will do little to help improve the technologies available to combat screwworm. Forced to suspend cattle imports from Mexico, the United States emergency containment measures could hit consumers extremely hard. the official Congressional Research Service warned earlier this year that the United States' own cattle herd is at its lowest level since 1951 because of drought, making prices highly sensitive to any disruptions in the import chain. The self-inflicted wounds to the United States interests will hopefully help the Trump administration understand why actions taken in far corners of the world have consequences for the safety and welfare of others living at the other end of the planet. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.